Right, so I'm sure you're all going to know what I'm talking about when I make this point. Imagine that you're in the school lunch hall, or you're out to a meal with friends, or you've invited someone over to your house for a bit of tea, and it's getting to the end of the meal, and suddenly there's only one slice of cake left on the plate, or there's one slice of pizza left in the box, or there's just one crisp left in the bowl. Now, in the States where I grew up and where I'm originally from, it is a race. If you didn't grab that last piece of food, it's too bad, so sad, you've missed out, should be faster next time. But here in the UK, we love to do our little polite dance of, oh, I could never finish that, like you should have it, or oh no, I'm too full, you can have the last piece. And it's that back and forth, and it cracks me up because every meal, there's always that last piece of food it could be one little chip sat in the middle of the bowl, but no one's gonna eat it because oh, I don't want to be the one to eat the last bit of food. We're too polite to finish it off. And you all may be honestly that generous and be like, oh yeah, someone else should have it. But as I go through that polite dance and then they do eat it, I secretly am like, oh, you're the worst. I really actually wanted that for myself, but I guess I have to let you have it because I was being generous. Maybe it's just me, but I hope some people in this room relates to that feeling. Yeah. Now, at our services, we've been kind of diving into the Bible, and we're looking at currently this big, basically, sermon that Jesus taught when he was here on the earth. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. And we've been going through verse by verse, looking at kind of all the wisdom and the life stuff that Jesus talks about, and the truth that he spoke, and we're learning from that together. And he doesn't start talking about eating the last pizza slice in this bit that Sunny read, but this next part of the Sermon on the Mount is really about a heart of generosity. And this is going to be one of those convicting gut punches of a passage that can kind of initially be skimmed over as a cute little analogy, but actually it really speaks into something that can be a hidden problem for a lot of us. How generous are you? Now, especially if you've been a Christian for a long while, you know how you're supposed to act. You're supposed to be generous. You're supposed to help people. You're supposed to give things to the needy. And sometimes something like that can be kind of easy to fake, if we're really honest with ourselves. It can be something that's really easy to have a facade about, especially on a Sunday morning or in a small group or at a church event or when we're giving a donation. It's really easy to pretend like we're being super generous with what we're doing. But as most of the topics that we've been looking over the past couple months about the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus has been teaching, from things from praying to murder to marriage, Jesus isn't just looking for a tick box of, oh yeah, good job, you did that. He's always asking, what is going on in the heart of you, the person, and what's the challenge that your heart is dealing with in those situations? So today we're thinking how generous are we at the meal table when we offer that last chip on the plate, but we really begrudge the person who actually ate it? How generous are we with our time when we have to go visit someone in the hospital, but the whole car ride there we're complaining about how busy we are and how we don't have time for this? How generous are we with our judgment when we welcome someone with a giant smile, but then are gossiping with them over a cup of tea later? Humans, and especially Christians, even Christians included, we can put on a very generous facade sometimes, but what is our heart doing? That's kind of what we're looking at today. So what does Jesus have to say about this? Now, you might be a bit concerned that, did Jared prep the wrong thing? Because what Sunny read said nothing about generosity. That would be awkward if that was true. But don't worry, this is actually a bit of scripture that has some kind of Jewish tradition tied into it, because Jesus spoke this over 2,000 years ago. So he was kind of alluding to some sayings of that time, to some traditions of that time, and then mix in there some Greek translations that doesn't quite translate to English. And we get to a really interesting understanding of what Jesus is saying in these two verses. And I'm not going to go way in depth. If you want to know kind of some good study resources, come and chat to me afterwards. It's really amazing stuff. But essentially, I'm going to kind of point out two things that are really important to know about these verses. So it starts, the eye is the lamp of the body. if your eyes are healthy. Now, this is the first word that has a bit of a weird translation to it. So it could be your eyes are healthy. Some versions say if your eyes are good. And you might have a little footnote there that actually says what this kind of Greek word really means, literally, is single. If your eyes are single, but in the context of generosity. So kind of no hidden agenda to your generosity, no like backhanded generosity, but if your eyes are just singly, purely generous is what Jesus is kind of talking about here. This kind of word, healthy, good, single generosity, is used in other parts of the Bible as well, and why we kind of get this context. There's a verse this guy named James wrote about when he's talking about God gives generously. He's like, God has no ulterior motives. He just gives generously. And later in the New Testament, the guy called Paul is writing, and he says, like, if your gift is giving, then you should give generously. If you're like really good at giving, give generously, purely, simply, just generous. He also writes to a church in this town called Corinth, and he's talking about how their generosity as a church can be an incredible blessing to other people. That's what Jesus is kind of drawing out here. If your eyes are good, single, generous, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, now here's the other thing that we have to look at. The unhealthy, or some translations say if your eyes are bad. Here that kind of literally means like evil, but in a grudging, stingy way. So if your eyes are grudging, or if your eyes are stingy, and this kind of phrase of having bad eyes is used loads of times also in the Bible, which is why we can get the context. In the Old Testament, back when, like, way before Jesus was around, kind of when the Israelites were first following God, there was this amazing pattern where every 7 years, all debts were canceled. Amazing way to live. I would love that. So every 7 years, every debt that you had was canceled, and the 7th year was like this amazing blessing year, and then you go through the 6 years. But the trouble with that is people started to think, oh, it's year 6.5, year 7 is coming up, I'm about to cancel all these debts. If someone comes to me and asks to borrow something, ooh, I don't know if I want to let them borrow it, because in like 2 months, all debts will be canceled, and what if they don't pay it back? So God had to kind of give them this rule and warning in a book called Deuteronomy. And he said, be careful not to harbor that wicked thought of the 7th year is coming up soon. All the debts are going to get canceled. And he says, don't do that so that your eye is hostile, your eye is bad towards the needy among your fellow Israelites. And you give them nothing because you know that 7th year is coming up. So it's that warning of don't let your eyes be bad. Don't be stingy or ungenerous. There's also another really cool section in a book of Proverbs, which is loads of just wise sayings in the Bible. And this is what the author wrote. He said, do not eat the food of a begrudging host. So don't eat the food of someone who is begrudging, who has that evil eye, that bad eye. Do not crave his delicacies, for he is the kind of person who is always thinking about the cost. He says, eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. And then I love this. It's like, you will vomit up the little you have eaten, and you will have wasted your compliments. Now, I'm making a lot of food analogies because I love food. But again, I don't know if you've ever had anyone over for tea, and you make like a lot of food, and you're like, oh, there's going to be great leftovers tomorrow for lunch. Like that's your plan as you're making the food. And they come over to your house, and they're just eating and eating and eating, and your leftovers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And suddenly you're like, there's no leftovers left. That's this proverb is saying, like, that ungenerous heart, it's better to not even go to someone's house who's thinking that about the leftovers. But actually, how amazing would it be to the person that's just like, have all the leftovers, a generous heart. There's no kind of in their heart there. So Jesus is saying, like, if you have that kind of eye, that bad eye, that ungenerous, stingy view, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So suddenly, this cute little saying about lamps and eyes and light gets a whole lot more convicting, I think, doesn't it? This one is a really great challenge, and it requires us to do kind of a bit of personal work with these verses. Because what Jesus is talking about isn't necessarily the outward actions of generosity. I can't follow you around for a week and see how generous you're being if you have that good eye or bad eye mentality, because this is a heart issue. It's what's in the heart that Jesus is getting to. And I can't always call that out of you if I stood around with you for a week and saw everything that you did. This is for us to work on. You could be outwardly and super generous, and the entire world, the most generous person ever. You could give to the needy. You could spend time helping out. You could do loads of favor. But only God knows what's going on in your heart. And you know as well, hopefully. Is the motives a true kind of single-minded generosity, or is it evil, begrudging stinginess that you're serving out of or generously giving out of? Something we have to kind of honestly examine our own hearts about. This last sentence that Jesus talks about is kind of the ultimate calling out of our actions. He's like, light is good. That's kind of, we just know light is good. Light is good for us. The sun is good for us. That's kind of the metaphor that Jesus is always playing on. Like, light is goodness. It's pure. It's holy. It's the thing of God. It's the kind of the perfect original creation to us in this world. Jesus says at one point, like, you, as my followers, are the light on the top of the hill. Let your light shine. But we can kind of project light, in quotation marks, in our generosity. But if that light that we're showing is coming from a heart of darkness, a heart of begrudging, he's like, there's no greater darkness or evil than that. We've kind of taken God's amazingly pure light, and we've turned it into this almost sneaky darkness. That's a hidden darkness in our hearts. And man, that's when we're pretending to be God's light, but it's actually coming out of darkness. Like, there's nothing worse than that. There's being bad, and then there's pretending to be good, but you're actually bad. And this analogy might be way too far, but I thought it was great. Imagine, like, what's worse? Is it worse to have someone going around murdering people in broad daylight? Like, that's pretty bad, but hopefully they'll get caught soon. You know, they're doing it in broad daylight, everyone sees them, they get caught. Is that worse, or is it worse to be like the serial killer who's secretly luring and gaining people's trust and trying to be nice to them, and then they lure them and then they murder them like a Netflix true crime drama? Like, that's the kind of hidden darkness of our hearts that almost Jesus is alluding to. If we're pretending to have light, how great is actually the darkness? And if you kind of have been with us for a while, or if you just flip back a different page in your book at the very start of the sermon, Jesus kind of was like, here's the big main values of what it means to follow Jesus, to love God. And he says in Matthew chapter 5, he says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." When we have that kind of hidden darkness of the ungenerous heart, it can drive us down a really miserable path. First of all, it makes us hard to just live with ourselves. We envy other people's success. We shut down our hearts to other people's needs. We have a grudge over other people's happiness that we see, and it steals away our peace and our joy and our happiness and our contentment in life. And it's a really, really miserable way of living. But it doesn't just stop there, because it not only makes it hard to live with ourselves, but it makes us hard to live with other people. Because suddenly we're absorbed by our own desires, we withdraw from the inconvenience of other people's needs, we avoid the cost and the investment that it takes to be truly generous, and it makes us hard to live with other people. And then the worst step is that it makes us hard to live with God. Because there is literally no more purely generous person in the entire universe than God. A God who gave his only son for us when we don't always show that we appreciate it. A God who gives good gifts. A God who shows forgiveness to us even when we keep messing up, but he's just like, you're still forgiven. How can we be close to a God whose heart is just on fire with generosity and love if we're closed off and frozen with greed and ungenerosity and stinginess? It makes it hard to live with God. There's a theologian called William Barclay who sums it all up, and he says, "The grudging eye distorts our vision. The generous eye alone sees clearly, for it alone sees as God sees." And that's what I want. And hopefully that's what you want too, to see as God sees, to look at the people around me just purely with love and with generosity in my time and generosity in my possessions and generosity in my judgments and prejudices and to the generous of the last slice of pizza. Like, that's how God views people. And we're going to need to wrestle down a lot of our human nature to push the human nature greediness aside. It's going to take a lot of work. But you can ask God to help you with that. You can ask God to call out tomorrow, God, when I head into my school or to my work or to my family or the shops or the community, God, help me to see these people with your eyes. To be people who bring more of kind of God's kingdom and God's way of doing things with just this pure generosity into the world. Not darkness, just pretending to be light. Because that does nothing for anyone other than cause a lot of destruction and damage. But to be just light. If your eyes are healthy, they're purely, singularly generous, your whole body will be full of light. So to close, just kind of think about, let me wrestle with this. Where are my eyes being ungenerous? Where are they being unhealthy or bad or stingy and grudging? And make that an honest question to yourself. Like, where in my generosity have I had that heart of, not really into this right now? And let's kind of bring this to God as we reflect on that. And God, thank you for your word and this massive challenge. Help us to be honest with ourselves where we're pretending maybe have this facade of generosity, but it's kind of this sneaky darkness. God, will you call that out of us? Will you help us to do better, to be ones that kind of exemplify you and your light and your pure love and generosity? Jesus, we thank you for that generosity you showed when you were here. God, for sending your son. Challenge us today, God. Help us to kind of put aside every way that we've done wrong in the past. You say you're forgiven. And we step out of here today with that reminder, that challenge of, hey, how can I just be singularly, purely generous? Jesus, we thank you for everyone here, and just thank you for the love that you've shown us. In your name we pray. Amen.